Alright, so I'm Corey Farrenkopf, and this is Fences and Full Moons, or at least the beginning of it. So here we go. They'd accepted that Leah was a werewolf. Invested in the thick steel chains, silver jewelry, and poured cement kennel. His father, Clark, watched 57 YouTube videos from other parents discussing building techniques, how to sink footings deep, wrap fencing beneath the structure, wire a solar array on the kennel roof to generate electricity. He wanted his son to have the best of the best, despite the backaches and the scars on his knuckles. He'd never been handy before the symptoms manifested. The kennel had done its job for 15 cycles before Leo got out and ate the chickens. It was a small flock, only enough to supply their family with eggs for breakfast, nothing for the farm stand Clark and his wife dreamed of adding to the front lawn. Leo finally pried apart the gate, tore through the padlocks, and ignored the jolt from the electrified fence. Maybe a moat would have been better, Clark said, holding the gate back in place. In this version of the story, it's about a parent dealing with a child who has this repetitive illness. But you can also read it as any loved one caring for another loved one with an illness, whether that's mental health-wise or like a physical illness. It's interesting because this story originally started out with kind of two focuses. There was another prong to this that dealt with toxic masculinity and a father trying to figure out a way to teach his son not to embrace violence, not to embrace anger. And this being a piece of flash fiction, I was working with the editor of Flash Fiction Online at the time, Suzanne Vincent. She's now moved on to other things. But we kind of identified that the story was getting pulled in two different directions. And we're like, this is flash fiction, we need to focus it on one. So we stuck with raising a child or a loved one with illness. And I think that's one of my favorite things about writing fantastic and fabulous fiction, is that you can take some magical element like werewolves and have it stand in for some other big life issue that you or someone you know is dealing with. And it creates like an interesting way of looking at that. And it's one of my favorite things to do in Flash. The second part of it is, what characters are we dealing with? So you've got Clark. Clark's the father of... I always forget my characters' names. Clark's the father of Leo. Clark's like 40 years old. He is a homeowner. He also is a postman, which you don't learn in this little excerpt. And he's watching all of these YouTube videos on how to build the best werewolf kennel. And I took that out of my brother-in-law has chickens, and there's all these YouTube videos about how to build the best chicken kennel. And there's all these people who are like, no, my design's perfect, and they have all these different contraptions that are set up to like get the chickens water and prevent like foxes from getting it. And I was like, that's a really cool idea. Let's apply that to werewolves. And then the second character is Leo, and Leo is he's like between the ages of 13 and 15. No, I think he's younger than that. I think he's like 12. In my mind, he's 12. And he's just a young boy. He's blonde with like buck teeth, and he's got a bad bowl cut because his mom's not the best at cutting hair. And he is recently becoming a werewolf, and that's very sad because there's no way of him not being a werewolf. So, yeah, that's question one for you. Yeah, so the narrative dilemma is the fact that Clark recognizes his son has this illness, and that more likely than not he's not going to get better, and there's going to be a lot for him to deal with, a lot for him to manage, and it's going to be a lot of strain on him. But he's a dad, so he's like, this is my son, I've got to take care of my son. And the main dilemma is whether he is going to do his best to be the best father in this situation, to be the best caregiver in this situation, or whether he wants to not do that and maybe set his son free, because he's a werewolf, and werewolves kind of will take care of themselves in the wild, I guess. But he has to decide what kind of life he wants to live and what kind of life he thinks is right or morally right, because so much of my stuff I focus on like what's the morally right thing to do. So yeah, that's the hard choice he has to make: be the father of the werewolf, not be the father of the werewolf. Yeah, so I think the main way I could talk about that is in a lot of my earlier writings, but this is from feedback from different editors and my agent and different readers, is that a lot of my characters are passive. right? A lot of my characters have the world kind of making decisions for them, or other characters making decisions for them, or whatever the hard point in the plot is making decisions for them. And that doesn't read for always the most enjoyable of short stories or novels. And so I've been spending a lot of time thinking on passivity in my own life and the idea of being like active in your own life, because I am a fairly passive human being. So now, because I've realized that this is a weak point in my writing, I make sure I make my characters as active as possible. I make sure they're the ones making the decisions. They're the ones that aren't necessarily just being pushed forward by society or pushed forward by the desires of other characters, that my own characters get to act on their own wants and needs. And that brings me to the other part of how my writing has changed a lot, or my character development has changed, is I focus a lot on character logic, making sure that I've created this character, and in my mind, they have to react to situations in a certain way, and that has to make sense given their background, their mental composition, their view of the world. And I make sure I don't stray from that, because when your character is making logical decisions, it makes them ring false. It makes them not feel fully fleshed out. And the easiest way to do that is to focus on their needs and their wants, like what specifically does this character desire in life, and how are they moving towards getting that. And when you make your character move towards getting that and make your character make those decisions, they're no longer passive for the most part. So those are kind of like the two main things I've been thinking about recently with my own like character developments. Yeah, so I guess we'll stick with the topic of werewolves and lycanthropes. There's a story by Karen Russell called St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves, and it's the title story to her collection, St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves. And it's one of my favorite stories. When I teach creative writing classes, I almost always teach this one. The basic plot is there's essentially these nunneries and these missionaries of some vaguely Christian faith that are essentially taking werewolf children or lycanthropic children, or they're like half wolf, half human, so I don't really know if they go through like cycles of the moon or whatever. But so they're taking these wolf children away from their family, away from their packs, bringing them to the monasteries and the nunneries and teaching them to be humans, right? They're teaching them how to write, how to dress appropriately, how to use a bathroom, how to play with others, how to be prim and proper, and all these ideas of like proper society. I say proper society with quotes around it. And you're given the perspective from this one female wolf child, and she's very much struggling with this, with does she want to become more human? Does she want to embrace that side of things, or does she want to stay with her wolf pack family? Does she want to stick with that kind of trajectory? And she's taken to the nunnery, and all these nuns are teaching her all this stuff, and a lot of her fellow the other girls who were taken with her, a lot of them are getting good at being human. They're singing well, they're able to play instruments, they do all the sort of like proper, again, human stuff. And she's not necessarily getting it so well. And essentially there's like a make or break at the moment where it's like either she's going to succeed in this or they're going to cast her back into the wild. And she has to make the decision whether she is going to embrace all the teachings or she is going to embrace what she thinks will make her happier, which is being back with her pack. And there's this one moment where another character kind of steps in and forces her hand to like, you have to make the decision now. And it's one of the most like heartbreaking moments. Like you see it coming and you're like, oh God, this is where she has to do this. This is where it's going to happen. And it's either going to be really sad in one direction or really sad in another direction, as a lot of like literary fiction is. And I won't tell you how it goes, and I won't give you much more than that. But it's one of my top favorite examples of like a moment of change, like in a story where you see like this one thing happen that's going to redefine a character's life and the trajectory of their path. And it's so plainly done that it's like a great thing to look at if you're struggling with that in your own writing. I'll give a shout out to Flash Fiction Online and to The Arcanist, which are both online flash fiction magazines that publish really amazing speculative flash fiction. They do horror, sci-fi, fantasy, any mixture of all of those. And if you're someone who's interested in reading more flash fiction and more speculative flash fiction, they're both great magazines to check out. I always love what they do, and yeah. So, another thing to shout out, just for the sake of it, is I have a story that came out in Tiny Nightmares, which is edited by Lincoln Mitchell and Najeksi Nieto, and it is it's like 50 stories, 50 flash stories that are all horror, and it's like one of the best examples of like a horror flash anthology I've ever read. I have a story in it, so like I have another reason for promoting it. But there's so many good authors in it. There's like Stephen Graham Jones and Jack Jemkin, Amber Sparks, and it's just phenomenal. And if you are interested in this kind of story that I just read to you and this sort of thing, like that is a great anthology to pick up. So thank you.